Welcome to the next episode of Great War Story. This one I've called Amputation Under Fire with a pocket knife. This one I'm experimenting by putting all the action up front at the beginning, and then I go into all the background and the details and what I can work out about it. So if all you want is the action, just stick around for the first few minutes. I get this story from this book, With the Machine Gunners in France and Palestine, the official history of the New Zealand Machine Gun Corps in the Great War. My New Zealand grandfather was with the machine gunners from 1917 to 1918. And this particular story comes from October the 5th, 1918. And I'm reading from that book now. The work of Sergeant D.H. Taylor during the operation was very meritorious. He directed and controlled the fire of 2 guns from the attic of a small cottage, which was quite exposed and twice hit by shells. Private J. Donaldson, one of Taylor's party, performed a very gallant act. During some heavy shelling, a comrade was pinned down by the debris of a fallen wall and his leg shattered. To free the unfortunate man, Donaldson had to amputate the shattered leg with a jackknife. And yes, a jackknife is just the size of a regular pocket knife that you'd buy these days. This was done under heavy shell fire. Seeing that his comrade must have medical attention at once, Donaldson carried him to an aid post 400 yards away through an absolute inferno of shellfire, and then at once returned to his gun team. It is interesting to record that the wounded man eventually recovered from the effects of his injuries and the impromptu jackknife operation. Now, I haven't been able to identify who this person was who had his leg amputated, but one of these days, when I have more time, I'm going to go down and look up every single man who was wounded about this time. There are whole lists, and you can look them up, and pull all of their military files and try to find one who had his leg amputated. And you can see here, this is actually from England, where they were giving training in grading wool to men who had lost limbs. And just on that note, while I was looking for good images, I came across the story of this farmer called Kurt Kasser, who in 2019 had to self-amputate. His leg got caught in a threshing machine, and he was on his own. He didn't have a cell phone, had no way to call for help, so he made the difficult choice to amputate his own leg. Right, well, that's all the action in the episode. Now I'm going to go in and give you the broader context. So thanks for sticking with me for 2.5 minutes, if that's all you wanted. Otherwise, stick around and we'll go and see what we can learn about this incident. Now, the broader context is that this is in the middle of the 100 Days Offensive. It's the last big push by the Allies before the Germans sue for peace, and, we all know November 11th, which all brings it to an end. So effectively, the last 3 months of the war. And you can see here on this map that the British were advancing, the French were advancing. You can see the Americans, in fact, down on the bottom right, joining with the advance. So the Germans were being pushed on all fronts, and this episode happens a little bit between Cambrai and St. Quentin on the map, right bang in the middle. And the reason I'm interested in this time period is because, as I mentioned earlier, my grandfather's service with the machine gunners. He joined them on October the 28th, 1917, and he stayed with them till October the 8th, 1918. And these are various images that I've got of the New Zealand machine gunners. The one on the left, in fact, is the New Zealand Prime Minister Massey with the Deputy Prime Minister Ward during a tour when they went to meet the machine gunners. This is actually a screenshot from a movie that was taken and is preserved by the Imperial War Machine. You can go and watch it. I've given you the link there. It shows their visit to many of the different New Zealand regiments who were in France. The New Zealand machine gunners, they're about 3/4 of the way through the movie. And there's a photo of the Prime Minister's visit. I often wonder if my grandfather is in that shot somewhere, because he was definitely there at this time and place. But I've looked very closely at all the guys in the foreground, and there's nobody who even vaguely resembles my grandfather, but he could easily be one of those guys standing in the background. Now, the 100 Days Offensive was a return in many ways to open country warfare, at least to a certain degree. And of course, when you're being thrust forward in advance, it's a dangerous time, and many men died or were badly injured in these last few months, and my grandfather not least among them. The reason he ended his time with the machine gunners on October the 8th instead of being with them right to the end of November is because this happened to him. During an attack, during the 100 Days Offensive, he was hit by, who knows, a bullet or shrapnel or something like this. The family story has always been that something ricocheted off the machine gun and ripped his face open and broke his jaw. And he had been a very handsome man, as you can see on the right. And, well, he was still handsome, but seriously disfigured on a quarter of his face. If you're interested in that story and how we found those photos, you might go back in the my channel and look for the very first video I ever uploaded, because it was those photos that appeared in a New Zealand magazine that first started my obsession about researching all of these stories from World War I and World War II. Now, the particular area of action, as far as we're concerned, are in that red box I put down there. You can see there's the village of Vissel on the left, and just over the road from it there's a couple of small patches of forest. And, well, my family story and my time of interest in the machine gunners ends 3 days after October the 5th, because that's when my grandfather gets the wound, and that was when they were assaulting that village on the right called Ledane. So that's where my grandfather gets shot through the face. And in fact, once they captured Ledane, it was open country warfare. It was the first time in World War I that the Allies, from, well, a long, long time, saw open country in front of them. No more trench lines. It was the breakthrough they finally needed. And that was the day my grandfather was taken out of the war. Now here is a nice trench map, once again taken from the Scottish National Library, showing you what's going on in this battle. And I'm reading here from that book that I mentioned already, the machine gunner's book. The 2nd Canterbury Battalion was across the canal at Vissel. There it is down in the bottom. The high ground above Chenot Wood was cleared, and with the 3rd Rifle Brigade also moving forward, the Manière-Beaurevoir line was approached. So there's the Chenot Wood and the Chenot Copse, which gets mentioned later. And this is the way the New Zealanders, they got across the canal at that point and advanced into these woods. A defensive flank was formed along the spur to the south of Chenot Wood, the section of the Canterbury Company being moved forward to assist in its consolidation. So I think, based on those topographical lines, the spur is approximately there, but that's a bit of a guess on my part. As the 4th Battalion, 3rd Rifle Brigade moved across the canal opposite La Rue de Vigne and advanced towards Manière-Beaurevoir line, the Otago Company opened covering fire, which did not cease until the new gains had been consolidated. So you've got another group of New Zealanders who cross the canal here and move up there, and that yellow area is where there would have been New Zealand machine gun fire falling down from the Otago Company. Now, they're a little bit off the top of this map. I would have had to go and get a different trench map to show where they were. They were a little bit further north, but these machine gunners could easily manage barrage fire, 2,500, 3,000 yards, so they might have been off the map, but they were in a position to give covering fire to these troops crossing the canal in the north. And there is the Manière-Beaurevoir line there and there, and this was the final line in the Hindenburg line, because the Hindenburg line was a massive defence complex. It wasn't a single line of trenches, and they had one line with a gap between them and a second line of defence in case there was a breakthrough there. So you can see on the map to the left, it actually says Hindenburg line over here. So they'd already smashed through the earlier defensive lines of the Hindenburg. But this Manière-Beaurevoir line, this is the last defensive barrier in that Hindenburg, well, defensive complex, should we call it. And oh yes, and the Germans were still holding in strength Ledane, and this position on the map, M12B, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And again, it's always wonderful to use Google Maps to compare with these trench maps, and you can see that Chenot Wood is still there. It's just a little bit to the east of Vissel, and yeah, the terrain hasn't really changed much. The roads still run on much the same lines. Now we turn to the New Zealand Machine Gun Battalion War Diary for October. One section of Canterbury Company came into action against a party of the enemy, 50 strong at M12B. Though the uncertain light prevented good observation, heavy rifle fire was drawn from this point. So you can see where I put the German cross over there on the right. Now, elsewhere in the war diary, it gives coordinates about where machine gun teams from the Canterbury Company were placed. And it says they were placed in box 17 and box 18. Now, given that you had the heavy rifle fire coming from there, and also you can see where the trench line is running, and Bel-A's farm was said to have been held in strength by the Germans. So I think this must be a mistake in the war diary. For a start, if they were in box 17, it would have been suicidal to push machine gun teams forward to the box 18. So definitely not there. My guess, based on some of the other accounts I get later, is there's a mistake there. They were probably more likely in boxes 22 and 23 that I've put down here lower down on the map. Now, to really get a sense of where we are, I went on Google Street View and walked around, and on my left, those trees on the left are the edge, the southeast corner of Chenot Wood, and, well, I put on the map the direction I'm looking. So even though they're a little bit lower than the German positions here, in a sense they're slightly sheltered because they're below the crest of a rise. So I guess troops could have advanced up to the top of that crest, but once you stuck your head over the top of that, well, you would be definitely exposed to German rifle and machine gun fire. Now I turn to the history of the Canterbury Regiment. A patrol from the 2nd Company of the 2nd Canterbury Battalion found the enemy trenches east of La Rue de Vigne unoccupied. That explains, by the way, something I was a bit confused by, because you can see just how close this New Zealand crossing up here got to the trench line, and I thought, how could they possibly have got that close without being wiped out by concentrated machine gun fire? But it seems that the Germans were in disarray, they were retreating, and they had already abandoned this section of the line. Carrying on. The 12th Company met with considerable opposition in a sunken road east of Chenot Copse, where it captured 5 machine guns, killed numerous Germans, and took 15 prisoners. So even though the Germans had run away up here, they were still fighting quite close over here, so there was a bit of a battle in this sunken road. As the division on the right had not yet come up, the commanding officer ordered the 12th Company to form a defensive flank facing south, from Chenot Wood inclusive, and thence east along the high ground to the southwest of Bel-A's farm. The machine gun section working with the battalion was also detailed to protect the right flank. Under this protection, the 13th Company moved forward, and late in the afternoon had approached within a short distance of the Manière-Beaurevoir line. In the afternoon, the 37th Division came up on the right, but no further advance was possible, as the leading troops were held up by the Manière-Beaurevoir system of trenches, which was protected by a very strong belt of wire, 50 yards in depth and unbroken by artillery fire. Now, we have here Fox Farm, and we have where I think the defensive flank would be put up. And I walked around a bit on Google Maps looking for where there was a rise, and you can also see the topographical line. So this would be the logical place which would match the description we get of where they would form their defensive flank. And you can see that the lines of the road still are much the same, but you see that Fox Farm isn't there anymore. It's just a patch of wood where once there was a farm. It doesn't look like it was a terribly big farm, and if you look at the road leading to it, well, there's still a road that runs along there, but the road that runs north-south is gone. Again, I looked on Google Street View. It's just a dirt track now. There's no road leading there anymore. So this would also match the story, because I looked and looked for any kind of cottage that was isolated and exposed to German artillery fire where the New Zealanders might have set up a machine gun nest. And this indeed seemed to be a very good candidate, which matches the story of where that amputation with a pocket knife happened. Now, again, from the Google Street View, you can see on the X where I am on the trench map and the direction I'm looking. That thing that's marked as a road running east-west is, well, to call that even a farm track is a bit of an exaggeration, just a dirt line where the tractor sometimes goes up and down. And that area of bush that I showed you a moment ago, which is on the horizon there, that is where Fox Farm was. Now that looks like a very logical place. If there was a small cottage there, it commands over some height, over a little bit of a valley in this direction. It's also a good place to defend from any enemy troops that might be coming from the left over that crest. So I think this is a very good candidate for where that event happened. And, well, all the rest I've got for you is trying to work out who the individuals involved were. Now, I did manage to work out who the sergeant who was in command of those machine guns in that cottage. That was Sergeant Donald Harper Taylor. He was born in Wanganui, and he died in Wanganui, a small town in the North Island of New Zealand. And there he is, remembered as part of the Machine Gun Corps. He was born in 1892, and he died in 1964. He was part of No. 3 Company of the New Zealand Machine Gun Battalion. And, I always like to look for any interesting details about him. He was quite tall for the time. My grandfather was 5'6", which was quite average or normal at that time period for a male. So this guy at 5'11" and a quarter inches, his military file adds the quarter, he would have been quite tall. You imagine, not good to be tall in World War I, but he made it home. And the other guy, a little bit harder to identify, just with J. Donaldson. He's a private, and he performed the gallant act. He amputated the guy's leg and managed to get him to an aid station and then run back to his own machine gun team. Now, I think this is John Wason Donaldson, and he was from Invercargill in New Zealand, and you can see his gravestone there does indeed say he was in the Machine Gun Corps, and he lived from 1891 to 1973, and he was in No. 3 Company, so that matches up the same as his sergeant, so that certainly makes it look like it's him. Other interesting details I got: he actually signed up as one of these old men dugouts. They called them dugouts. These World War I veterans who signed up to serve again in World War II, usually on the home front. So, goodness me, I said he enlisted in 1949. He enlisted in 1940. He was 49 years old and enlisted as an old man in 1940. That's a typo on the screen, sorry about that. And the other interesting detail I noticed, if you know the history of the end of World War I, you'll know that the Spanish flu ripped around the world, and it actually killed more people than died in all of World War I. And there were some quite horrific stories of outbreaks on troop ships. You can imagine about the worst place. And he was struck down by influenza on his ship back to New Zealand, but he was one of the lucky ones who managed to survive. Now, the reason why I'm not 100% certain it's him, when you look through his military file, there is a note that says he was detached to the 3rd Army rest camp. Now, it's reported that he went on October the 5th, so this would match up the day of his rescue, but it also says that the day that he left was October the 1st, which would mean he wouldn't be present on the 5th for all of this action to happen. Now, it's possible there was another J. Donaldson who was in No. 3 Company. I mean, it's not such a rare name, but I've looked through on the New Zealand Government Archives, and he's the only one I could find who seemed to match up. He's in the right company, he's a machine gunner, and I think it's him. And, well, it would kind of make sense that while the guy who had his leg cut off would be traumatized, I'm sure the guy who rescued him would be kind of traumatized a bit too, and might need to be sent away from the front to have a bit of a break from the action for just a little bit, or maybe just a reward to try and keep him alive. So I still think it's him, but there is some reason to doubt. And I'm going to vary my goodbye slide a little bit. Normally it says, "Good evening, have you realized what pleasure you're missing when you don't own a radio?" This is an advertisement that my grandfather placed in a Wellington newspaper for his radio shop. But I've changed it this time to, "Have you realized what pleasure you're missing when you don't have a leg because somebody chopped it off with a pocket knife?" Well, that's a little unfair, considering the guy was going to die if he hadn't had his leg amputated, but all the same. And I love this picture of a New Zealander who with his artificial legs, and I can see that face with that very unimpressed look. Yes, thank you for saving my life by cutting off my leg. Thank you, I think. And that's the end of this episode. I kept it under 20 minutes for you.